Hi there, and welcome to this webinar about share research. And we're going to talk today about another misconception that some people have about share research. It's exciting now because share research as a metric is starting to get more and more used. And along with that comes questions and wonderings about how you can use this fabulous metric. So let's get started. Who are we here? Fred, can you start?
Yeah, so my name is Fredrik Piren. I'm commonly known as Fred. I'm a founder and currently CMO of a company called My Telescope. We've been working with share research and search for the last 5 years, investigating different things, and therefore also encountered a lot of these misconceptions that we might actually have been guilty of in the beginning as well, but then the data has proved us wrong.
And I'm Hans. I'm a practitioner, as it says. I've run agencies in the US and in Sweden and worked as a creative also, total of 40 plus years, always looking for ways to prove to our clients, my clients, that what we do actually matters and brings their success to their business and their brands. And for various reasons, of course, to make sure that the clients are happy and succeed in raising more budgets for next year, and for us as an agency also. So always looking for smart ways to prove our value. And that's why it's exciting to talk about share research. Before we start with the misconception of today, B2B versus B2C, Fredrik, can't you just give us 60 seconds about what is share research if we have some newcomer out there?
Sure. Share research is relatively simple. I mean, what we have as an assignment as marketeers is to make people choose us, make people have that desire of us, and with that make people think of us in the first place as one of the options that they have. For those who have read Byron Sharp's mental availability part, it's all about that, basically creating that mental availability. What we've seen in the last couple of years is that when people wonder about something, anything, even when they're just discussing something with a friend, they basically will pop over the phone or just look at and research it online. They'll start to Google it in that sense. So what we do in share of search is that we actually look at, okay, how much people are out there looking particularly for either your brand or your product, or actually tending in a certain way about a topic that there is in society. But of course, you get a volume back, but then to know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, you have to compare it to something. So you take also the volume of your competitors, and then you basically make a percentage split of that to get an impression of how people swing either towards your brand or a competitor's brand in the market.
Great, thank you. So today's topic is B2B, and it's extra exciting for me because I work quite a few years with business to business. And one thing that characterizes business to business is that when you buy stuff, you do it for your company's money and not for your personal money.
Yeah.
How does that change your search behavior, Fred? Does it change it at all?
Well, a lot of people would think that it does, but actually it doesn't do that much. Basically, what recent data has shown, and this was done mainly by surveys over the last couple of years, but this data comes from 2021, shows that, of course, a lot of the B2B purchasers do a lot of thorough research before buying. And it kind of comes to the point that you've mentioned, because if you buy something online, depending on the investment you make as a private individual, if you made a mistake, you can blame only yourself. You will suffer the consequences, maybe ignore it, and then that's it. B2B people, their livelihood depends on it, right? They might actually lose their job over making a very bad decision. So of course, they're going to research actually much more. Content is a very good thing, and a lot of people use LinkedIn and so forth, but everybody, about 71% actually, to be more precise, prefers starting by search engines to find their information. And that actually means that even for B2B, it has a lot of potential looking at the search volumes, looking at the search keywords, and maybe even more to a certain extent than B2C, into getting an idea of which direction the market swings. Of course, the difference in B2B and B2C is that the more niche you go, the fewer players you have. So on one end, it's easier because you will very easily identify the competitors you want to look at yourself with, and you can also be quite assured that most people will look at all of these competitors. But it also makes it a bit trickier to find the exact search volumes that you want to have if you go into a niche.
Right. You talked on your first slide, you talked about share of search as being your share of the total searches in your category. Mm-hmm. Last week, we talked about volumes, and if low volume can actually still be interesting when you look at how it relates to your brand and your commercial success. Would you say that business to business normally gets lower search volume still than consumer goods?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And as I said, the more niche you go, the lower that volume will be, right? Because I mean, the market of people who potentially buy from you isn't that big. And actually, that's something that I can show as well. If you will, I'm going to go into our tool here now. But there is at some time in my life, I was working with in the mining industry. And then, of course, I mean, we start to look into, okay, how can we use this also to help those people out and so forth. And it becomes a bit tricky. And immediately here in this example, we're going to cover a couple of things, right? So within the mining industry, which is a relatively big industry when it comes to money, all right, there's billions and trillions going on in that business. There's not, of course, a tremendous amount of players who provide manufacturing for, solutions, tools, and so forth. So if we take kind of the biggest ones that we have here, you have Epiroc, which is a Swedish company, actually, Sandvik, which is also a Swedish company, and you have Caterpillar, which is quite known from cranes and so forth, right? So if you're going to go into that niche, already there you can see that volumes are going to be a bit lower. I mean, Epiroc now is what we call a pure player. It only plays within the industry of mining. So if we look at then, it used to be owned by Atlas Copco, which is a much bigger player. But Epiroc itself, you get 2,400 search volume in Australia, which, to be quite honest, is surprisingly high for Australia. But that's also because they are a pure player. If we look at Sandvik, for example, which is their competitor, you get to an immediately much higher number, right? But at the same time, Sandvik is also a company that is present in a lot of multi-factors, right? So there we will have to see that, okay, if we talk specifically about mining, we would actually have to specify much more that we talk about mining. So then if we just look into mining and mining equipment, right, then we look at this one and this one here, then you see that the volumes are already going a lot smaller, right? So then you have smaller volumes, and you talk about volumes of 200, 210 over time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're less representative. Because yes, you will have less people looking for it, but those people are the ones who are buying. Those people are the ones who are making the orders. So you will still have that representative level if you look at it from on a national level for Australia. So even if the numbers are low, and the more you're going to go into a niche, the lower the numbers will be, they are still representative from what we've seen compared to sales that we can get, sales numbers or order intakes.
Well, it is interesting. You talk about the mining industry, and of course, if you are in that industry or working for that industry, you have a lot of interest. But looking from the outside, you would expect there be fairly low interest just because you don't understand it. But when you scratch the surface a little bit, and you see, it's like open a can of interest. There it is. Everybody in that industry is looking, discussing, talking, etc.
Yes.
But it's interesting to see how, again, the importance of words when you start to refine your search a little bit, and you get to the core of the search.
Exactly. And if you want to get to the core of the search more using our product, then that's not a problem, because then you can basically go Caterpillar, for example, you have the animal Caterpillar, you have everything that they do from trucks and so forth. So if we talk more about mining, then you can just type in mining and you would go much more in detail, right? And people tell me like, yeah, but then you're kind of, making things maybe harder for yourself, but actually you're not. Because if you look at anybody who would like to get more information about Caterpillar mining equipment, if they would put in Caterpillar, they would also get everything from butterflies to, everything in between, clothes. I mean, Caterpillar even makes clothes and so forth, right? Whereas if you are a B2B purchaser, either you know immediately where to go and get it, or if you want to know more about the mining equipment, the latest things of Caterpillar in mining, then you'll have to put this in. And then you can still see the response that it gives, which, I mean, as I said, will be fairly low, right? Because again, I mean, looking at the number of mines there are in Australia, you won't have a tremendous amount of people looking for it. But as I said, I mean, the good thing is still that despite the fact that this is a very niche market, it still works a lot more, because a lot of people have to make a big investment. And before they make the big investment, as we said, 77% really wants to search. And so when we started comparing that with one of our partners that we looked at, they are making farming equipment in a rather niche area of farming. So it's not, it's one particular type of farming basically. And what they started doing is they looked at the share of search and they started comparing it to their order intake, right? The order intake, and then specifically also the market share that they had. So what they saw is that the sales volumes that they had was the best correlation, and they threw everything at order intake to see where can we get the best correlation. Search volumes were the best correlation, and then when they looked at it on a share of search perspective versus their competitor, and they looked at market share development of themselves, they also saw a similar thing, and they saw that correlation on market share versus share of search. So even for that specific niche part in the farming industry, they saw it, and it's not unlogical, because I mean, if you run a farm, I mean, farms have become huge. I mean, in Australia and New Zealand, you easily have farms of over 2,000 cows, or even if you go into dairy farming, 1,200 cows. So it's a big investment that these people have to make, and it can have big consequences. So what we saw here with them as well, and this is quite nice about this then kind of share of search as well, is that whenever they had a new product, which was then followed up by a campaign at that point, is that you had these spikes, right? And then it would go down again, and then would be a spike again. So having these campaigns or these product launches, would make the interest peak, and then it would slow down again, and then would go up again, and then would slow down again. But the overall trend was still positive and still increasing and still moving in the right direction. And that trend over the longer time, that trend line basically, that's the one that correlated very nicely as well with their trend line in market share, where they went from 22 to almost 25% of market share in 1 year, basically. Also thanks to these two spikes that were then product launch and a subsequent media campaign.
Right. And of course, 22% going to 24, 25%, it doesn't sound a lot, but it can mean, of course, millions and millions in whatever currency you choose.
Yeah. I mean, the agricultural market is huge, right? So, I mean, from what I remember, in that particular segment of the market, they had like 3 or 4 competitors, but the market, to your point, was still worth billions. So, I mean, if you take 2% of that billion dollar market versus 3 competitors, then that's still a lot of money that you're making.
Fred, can you describe to us how this is also predictive, where you can see today's search as an indicator of what market share you're going to get looking forward, and how this is a little bit different time-wise in different industries.
Yeah. So what is interesting with a lot share of search is that a lot of people also compare it to share of voice, right? And we've discussed this in other webinars as well. But what is very interesting here is that you have something which is also called ESOS, right? Just like you would have excessive share of voice, which meant that as long as you were talking much more and spending much more media than your competitors, than the market share you had, then the market share would follow. We see that the same is true with ESOS, right? Excessive share of search. So if you are getting significantly more share of search than your competitors, then over time it will follow, right? And that's when you talk about the time it takes between the two, that very much depends on the industry. And the rule of thumb is relatively simple. The bigger the investment, the longer the lag, right? So if people have to spend a lot of money buying your product or your service, then the lag will be longer as well, because people need more time to contemplate, get information, feel comfortable about the decision that they're making. When we look at FMCG, where people don't care, 1 or 2 weeks. When you look at pension plans and so forth, you can go up to 7 or 8 months before people really decide where to invest their money. In this particular part, there is a trend line, but it depends on which product category. In this case, it was, you would see a couple of months as well as a lag in between. But what was interesting with that as well is that basically you would see when we looked at their competitors, you would actually see that this competitor, which was good for the competitor, was a newcomer and had 55% or even more in share of search. So it was a tremendous amount of people looking for that particular brand. They increased by more than the 3 or 4 percentage points that our partner did, coming from somewhere around 8 up to 13.6, right? But if you look at the share of search that they have versus the market share, you saw that a lot more attention to them, a lot more brain space to them. So also when people were then ready to buy, they would buy more. They saw a tremendous increase. At the same time, what they saw is that one of the very old competitors that they had was losing market share, but they were also having a share of search significantly smaller than what they had as a market share. So those were 2 very nice proof points in a very niche. I can't repeat this enough. In a very niche part of the agricultural industry, that would prove that share of search worked, and that excessive share of search is also a fact, like what we've seen it in other industries.
Yeah, that's interesting. Your example on how your market share is bigger than your share of search, how it can serve as a very strong warning signal, and to allow you to change your plans, change your communication, whatever you need to do, because again, you are on a losing streak.
Yes, and specifically for these guys, it was quite interesting because if you work in FMCG, there's things like Nielsen and so forth that register sales, so you can get market share relatively simple. For these guys, it is significantly harder to get market shares. So they were very happy with using share of search as a proxy, because it would much faster give them the indication on who is the competitor to watch and which kind of competitor is dying, so that they would kind of like leave it on the side, and who would be their main target. Historically, they would have always thought that the one competitor who was still having a substantial market share, and who was their oldest competitor, was still their biggest competitor. But then this also showed them significantly that no, the younger brand who is up and coming is actually much more of a threat than what you think it is. And so it shifted them as well into orienting much more into beating that part competitor than the other ones that they were used to play against.
And this really shows, I think, one of the aspects that I think is fascinating, because again, share of search shows what people actually do. They search instead of what people say. And if you work with consumer research, you know that people don't necessarily tell the truth when we ask them about things. They want to be kind, they want to be nice, they want to be politically correct. But share research is very honest in that way.
Yeah, it's very honest. Yes, I mean, and that's what when people ask, is this representative, right? I always say, well, it is obviously representative for what people are specifically looking at. In this case, here, but also it's totally non-biased, right? It is exactly what people are looking for. And if you want to know and have to find the exact group, if you're working in a niche like this, to ask questions to, then that can be a challenge. Whereas here, in a very easy way, you can see the people who are looking for this particular type of product. They are people who are going to be interested in it. You know, I myself, having partially grew up on a dairy farm, I've never looked into our agricultural. I've never Googled agricultural machines in my life. So you know here that these people are definitely looking for it.
Yeah. Well, with all this said about B2B and B2C and share research, do you see, Fred, do you see any real differences between these two categories? If you will start to wrap it up a little bit.
I mean, I think that from...
Sorry. Before that, I saw that you had another slide where you showed different industries.
No, but that actually comes to this, right? I mean,
okay, good.
Testing this in different industries. You know,
yeah, that's interesting.
And finance, both in B2C and in B2B, right? So I mean, for all of these in different markets as well. And from where it comes to, is share research a proxy towards market share? We haven't seen any major differences, right? As I said, the lag changes. And for B2B, you have to be a bit more specific in the words of what specifically people are thinking of. And some people might think that that's quite hard, and some people might think that that makes it trickier, but actually it's not, because you just have to think, what would they encounter when they Google it, right? If they Google it, then they would have to be much more specific as well into what they would like to ask in order to get the right pages up. It's exactly the same thing here. Use those keywords, take the volumes of those keywords, and with those ones, you can actually start measuring and comparing it also to your sales volumes.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, we continuously forget to say that if people have any questions, they can obviously also use the Q&A part that's at the bottom. But I mean, when it comes to, I mean, talking about what are the main things that we need to look at, it's that. I mean, professionals do search. That's something very important to think of. You have to spend a little bit. The keywords are important, you know, when you look at that specific niche. But it's not much harder than you think. You just have to see how would people Google it. And if you ask yourself that question, it's going to be very, very easy.
And again, when you say about how would you Google it, Google allows you to constantly change how you're describing what you're looking for using different keywords. Mm-hmm. As I know you can with your product, you can just go back and forth, which is quite different from traditional consumer research, where you set and define a set of questions, and that's it. And a couple of months later, you have a result. Yeah,
no, but that's the good part. And I mean, if I go back quickly to our tool, the good thing that you have there is basically that you can have, we have both the search and the sentiment part. So we can also look at what elements are there that people like or dislike. Is there a general feeling or dislike? Because sometimes people search for your brand, but they don't necessarily know what to, if that's with a positive intention or a negative intention.
Right. Can you see, Fred, we have a question here from Simon.
Yes. Have you published any data on how this works across all those industries you showed, for example, in B2B financial or tech? Yes, we didn't do that directly because all those industries that we've been looking at, that was in collaboration with the IPA, the Institute for Practitioners in Advertising. And what we would see across that entire part is that basically there is if I'm not mistaken, 71% correlation across all these industries between the share of search and the market share. And that the brand plays quite a big role into that. about 83%, I think, can be deducted from investments into branding. There is a larger research on that, which we presented together with James Hankins at the FE Awards last year, which is about Marketing Week and so forth. But I'll get you some of those results if that's okay with you. I can get your email address of this.
Great. And also before we, if you're fine with that answer, Simon, yeah, good, thank you. You have quite a generous offer at the end of this webinar, don't you, Fred?
Yeah, I mean, for everybody who wants to go and check out the tool and want to play around with Share of Search themselves, they can go into our tool right up, and they get a 1 month free trial period. If you already have done that in the past and you don't, and your trial period has expired, then reach out to us. Just use the code webinar04, and then we'll extend that with another month for you. Absolutely no problem. So you can play around with it, and that you can also then get a feeling about how it is to combine that search with that sentiment, basically, and see what the real impact is of what you're doing out there.
Right. Today's topic was not sentiment, but as you mentioned it, I have to bring it up too, because again, you don't just get the search volume, you also get how and why people search, if they love your brand or hate your brand, which can be quite valuable knowledge.
Yeah, and that's the most important thing, I think, because I mean, yes, if people like you, that's a good thing, but you also want to know why, because then you know what you can do better, what you should continue and what you can improve, right? But I think we're getting a little bit towards the end of this. We have a series on these misconceptions of Share of Search. Some of them have already been posted on our webinar, on our website under the link with the webinars. That's where you can find the previous videos. We'll also have some in the upcoming weeks, right? Next time, we're going to go much more into how do we correlate Share of Search? How does that correlation really works? And what do people often do wrong? Then we're going to talk much more about the industry. So Simon, it will be coming back at that point, how we did that versus different industries, what the impacts were, and so forth. And then the last one is also, I mean, how do we implement this? Because a lot of people then compare it to SEO, SEM, don't really know where to get started. But that's also something that we will, the common misconception on how that implementation works is something that we will be reviewing in the near future. So
great.
Stay tuned, right?
If there are no more questions, all happy at this stage, we can just say thank you so much for attending, and hope to see you here again in 2 weeks.
Yes. Have a good day.
All right.
Thank you, Hans.
Thank you. Thanks, Fred.
Bye.